For hundreds of years, people have been interested in and scandalized by the sex lives of kings and queens. During the Tudor era, from Henry VIII's highly sexualized court to that of his daughter, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, things were very different. Some British rulers didn't mind or even encouraged extramarital relations at the court, while others were very strict about it. Every English ruler had a private life that is still interesting and sexy today. For example, Charles II would roll around with a Restoration actress, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert would spend all day romping around in the royal boudoir. And the way that kings' personal tastes affected their larger courts doesn't disappoint today's interested reader either. Victorian Court was prudish, but her bedroom was not. Particularly with regard to women, the Victorian age is characterized by a tendency towards sexual repression and prudishness. Despite the fact that the court of the Queen was concerned with giving the impression of propriety and order, Queen Victoria herself was somewhat more open about her desire to have sexual encounters. In 1840, after the wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, the two of them shared the same bed and lay together in the dark. Queen Victoria wrote about her first night with Prince Albert. Victoria enthusiastically claimed, "I never spent such an evening. My dear Albert sat on a footstool by my side, and his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms, and we kissed each other again and again. His beauty, his sweetness and gentleness. Really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband? Oh, this was the happiest day of my life." During this time period in the 19th century, the custom of having attendants present for the first night that a couple spent together had become obsolete. Although Victoria's first days as a married lady were filled with sensual moments with her new husband, the fact that she expressed her sexuality in such a way is shocking considering the current political climate. On the other hand, it is not completely dissimilar to Victoria, who wrote with great enthusiasm about the moment she saw her future husband in his white cashmere breeches with nothing on underneath. Upon receiving a warning from her physician that she should not have a kid at the age of 38, she expressed her dissatisfaction by asking, "Am I not to have any more fun in bed?" George III's court was family-focused. Prince Augusta of Saxe-Gotha, King George III's mother, was the one who raised him and provided him with guidance throughout his childhood. When he was younger, he wrote, "Two am born for the happiness or misery of a great nation, and consequently must often act contrary to my passions." This declaration was made in reference to the fact that his royal duties frequently prevented him from pursuing the personal connections he desired. In spite of this, George III wed Princess Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz in the year 1761, shortly after enthroning himself as King of England. The pair remained committed to one another throughout their entire lives, and over the course of their marriage, they had 15 children together. George never had a mistress. George, his family, and his favorite people spent their time at Kew Palace in a state of domestic simplicity, in between episodes of mental illness, which were most likely made worse by arsenic poisoning and relative imprisonment at Kensington Palace. With a total of 59 years and 96 days of reign, he continues to retain the record for the longest continuous reign of any king in the history of England. "Anything goes" was the motto at the court of Charles II. To set the stage for a raunchy court that was filled with hedonism, King Charles II had a large number of mistresses and a large number of children who were not his legitimate daughters. During the course of her relationship with Charles, Barbara Villiers gave birth to 6 children who were not her biological offspring. Charles considered all of these children to be his own, despite the fact that her youngest daughter was most likely not his. At court, Villiers was seen as a woman of great beauty, enormously vivacious and ravenous, foolish but imperious, and as a result of her influence, she was equally feared and envied by those who were in positions of authority. Nellie Gwynn, another one of Charles's woman pals, was an actress who worked professionally herself. In 1669, she began a relationship with the king, and from that point on she became a consistent source of amusement for the royal court. The wit, beauty, and comedic talent that she displayed both on stage and off continued to get her attention, and even assisted her in maintaining her appeal with the general population. George II loved his wife and liked his mistress. In the year 1705, George II tied the knot with Princess Caroline of Brandenburg-Ansbach, and the couple went on to have 9 children together. George, who had an official mistress for a period of 25 years, was passionately in love with his wife, the fat, funny, and adorable Princess Caroline, and he favored the presence of Princess Caroline above that of other feminine figures. The story goes that in order for George to be informed of the death of his father, he had to be ripped away from a love-making session he was having with Caroline. Henrietta Howard, who was George's official mistress, was Caroline's very own woman of the bedchamber. Although the courtiers believed that Charles had Henrietta as a mistress, rather as a necessary appurtenance to his grandeur as a prince than an addition to his pleasures as a man, Henrietta was not only witty and brilliant, but the king also had a deep affection for her. Additionally, literary contemporaries such as Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope had a favorable opinion of Howard. Marble Hill House, a Palladian villa that was constructed just for her, is where she left her legacy, despite the fact that she never had a significant influential position at court. Through its design, architects from all over the world were influenced. Edward III's court was full of strong-willed women. After his father, Edward II, was overthrown and assassinated with the assistance of a conspiracy hatched by Isabella and her lover Roger Mortimer, King Edward III was anointed king at the age of 14. He was raised in the court of his mother, Isabella of France, and grew up in the court of his mother. Over the course of 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer were able to exert influence over Edward's court. However, Edward III eventually organized a revolution, had Mortimer executed, and forced his mother into exile. In light of these conditions, Edward III's connection with his own court and household was established during this time period. Regarding the majority of his relationships, Edward III was quite selective about who he associated with. In the year 1326, Edward wed his cousin Philippa of Hainault, and the couple went on to have 14 children together, one of which was Edward, the Black Prince, who would eventually become Edward IV. According to reports, Philippa was a lovely and true person, and the couple enjoyed a wonderful marriage. On the other hand, Edward III chose Alice Perrers, who was only 18 years old at the time, as his mistress a few years before she passed away in 1369. Immediately following Philippa's passing, the affair became more well-known, and Perrers was seen walking around wearing golden attire. She had a significant amount of power over the court until she was banished just a few days before Edward's passing. Edward VII dedicated his court to pleasure. Throughout his life, King Edward VII, who was the son of Queen Victoria, had a number of mistresses, and his affairs frequently became the subject of royal scandals. Despite the fact that he was a playboy when he was younger, Edward VII became king in 1901, when he was 60 years old. Due to the fact that his mother lived for a very long period, the future king was able to be confirmed as the Prince of Wales for a number of decades. As a result, he needed to find methods to spend his plentiful free time. Edward's parents made arrangements for him to marry Princess Alexandra of Denmark in 1863, but prior to the wedding, the future king became embroiled in a controversy with a woman named Nellie Clifton. This occurred before the wedding took place. In spite of the fact that the connection was brief, it was embarrassing for the royal family. On the other hand, neither marriage nor this circumstance slowed down Edward's progress. It is said that he had a continual stream of mistresses during his whole life, one of which being Winston Churchill's mother. On 2 separate instances, he testified in a different kind of court, and one of those times he lied about an affair he had with a French woman whose husband was attempting to divorce her for adultery. Even though Edward VII was only in power for a very brief period of time, he gained the affection of his country despite the fact that he engaged in hedonistic behavior. Henry VIII was at the helm of a bed-hopping Tudor court. The sexual adventures of Henry VIII are well known, and his royal court reflected both his preferences and his example. Henry VIII's sexual activity was also well known. Catherine of Aragon became pregnant when Henry was having sexual encounters with his mistress, Mary Boleyn. Henry's many mistresses supplemented the relationships he was still having with his wives, with whom he continued to have relationships. At the period, Mary Boleyn was married to William Carey, and she gave birth to 2 children, a daughter named Catherine in the year 1524, and a son named Henry in the year 1526. After Henry had successfully obtained a divorce from his first wife, he went on to have an affair with Mary's sister, Anne, whom he eventually married. Anne was in a relationship with Henry Percy, one of the noblemen in Henry VIII's court and an assistant to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, when the king fell in love with her. At the time of their wedding, Anne was pregnant with Henry Percy. It is possible that the king and his devoted cardinal were the ones who shamed Percy out of his love with Anne in order to make it easier for Henry to take her. According to the story, Wolsey allegedly told Percy that he embarrassed his family by showing fondness for Anne because of her low birth, and he threatened to come clean with his father about it. Due to the fact that he was sufficiently terrified, Percy submitted to the king's will. According to Wolsey's gentleman usher, the cardinal told Percy, "I order you, and in the king's name command you, not to see her again if you intend to avoid the full wrath of his majesty." The court of George that was haunted by doomed love. The court of King George I consisted of his mistresses, of which he typically preferred to have 2 or 3, in addition to his favorite German women. George I, who had previously served as the Elector of Hanover, populated his inner circle with both male and female Germans. It did little to improve his popularity in a place where he was very much an outsider. He scarcely knew a word of English when he ascended the throne, and he hardly learnt any by the time he went away. He lavished his German mistresses and courtiers with gifts of land and cash, but this did little to boost his popularity. Sophia, the wife of George, developed her own romantic relationships, one of which was with Count Philipp Christoph von Königsmarck. Due to the fact that von Königsmarck was an outstanding soldier, George chose to disregard the relationship for a period of time. On the other hand, after the couple attempted to run away together, George had his wife arrested, divorced her, and confined her to a castle till she passed away in 1726 while she was there. The court of King George IV was fashionably over the top. Despite the fact that his father placed a strong focus on family, George IV was not a family guy in any way, shape, or form. Despite the fact that George IV was married, the union was not a joyful one. The king had only decided to marry the fat, ugly, and tactless Caroline of Brunswick because he was in need of financial support. Following George's accession to the throne in 1820, Parliament made an offer to pay Caroline to remain outside of England. However, she declined the offer. However, this did not matter for very long. Caroline passed away in the year 1821, not long after learning that she would not be allowed to attend the coronation of her husband. The court of James I was full of his male favorites. James II's response to transgressions was different from that of his predecessor Elizabeth IV, although it is not certain whether sexual activity was more prevalent at James I's court than it was at Elizabeth I's. King James IV of England did not punish philandering as long as his courtiers remained quiet about the problem. This is in contrast to the Elizabethan emphasis on respectability. Throughout his life, James had a large number of male courtiers who were the objects of his heart. During his rise through the ranks of James's court, Robert Carr, who later became the Earl of Somerset and Lord Chamberlain, was considered to be one of the king's favorites. In the year 1614, Charles fell out of favor, and George Villiers, the first Duke of Buckingham, quickly succeeded him as the monarch of England. Charles I of England liked his court proper and orderly. In an effort to rehabilitate the public's perception of the monarchy and the royal family, the court of Charles I created stringent regulations to be followed within the court. Henrietta Maria, Charles's wife, was a fervent supporter of the arts, and they fostered the growth of various artistic expressions, including music, poetry, and play, within the royal court. Great spectacles, also known as masquerades, were held at court during Charles's reign. These masquerades and spectacles combined pomp, elegance, and amusement. His son, Charles II, would present at court later in the 17th century, but Charles I's stringent morality led to heavy punishments for sexual errors. This is a far cry from what Charles I would present his son with. Eleanor Villiers, a maid of honor, became pregnant and asserted that Sir Henry Jermyn was the father of the child. After Jermyn, who was Henrietta Maria's vice-chamberlain, admitted to having sexual relations with Eleanor but declined to marry her, he was punished by being thrown into prison and then being required to leave England for a period of 2 years. The judge removed Eleanor from the courtroom, and she never came back. On the other hand, it seems that Charles I allowed his lusty emotions to be displayed in at least one of his letters, albeit within the context of courtly instruction. Charles wrote to Jane Horwood, one of his courtier's stepdaughters, saying he imagined that there is one way possible that you may get a swiving from me. Swiving was an offensive euphemism for intercourse, but only if she obtained the right authorization to meet with him privately. Jane Horwood was one of his stepdaughters. We hope you liked this video. Subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.